While I was unconscious in the operating room, my husband transferred our entire house down payment savings to fund his family's Caribbean anniversary cruise. When I called him from my hospital bed, still barely able to hold the phone, he didn't lower his voice or say he was sorry. He just laughed and said, "Don't be dramatic. Mom and Dad only get their 35th anniversary once." The next 10 minutes exposed a betrayal I had never imagined possible. I came out of surgery disoriented. The ceiling was unfamiliar, a pale washed-out white with fluorescent light panels that buzzed faintly above me. My throat was raw from the breathing tube. My abdomen felt like it had been wrung out and put back. And the first thing I registered clearly was the sound of a monitor counting out my heartbeat. I had been rushed to the hospital 2 days earlier with a ruptured ovarian cyst. My husband had been there when the paramedics arrived. He had held my hand in the hallway before they wheeled me away and said, "I'll be right here." I reached for my phone on the bedside table and turned it over. My banking app had sent 3 notifications while I was under. I opened the first one thinking it was a routine transfer alert. It wasn't. 2 withdrawals had cleared my joint savings account, one for $14,200, another for $8,600. Together, they wiped out every dollar my husband and I had spent 3 years building for a house down payment. The balance that morning, the morning I was admitted, had been $22,800. My hands were shaking before my brain caught up with what I was reading. I called my husband immediately. He picked up on the 3rd ring. I could hear music in the background and voices layered over one another, the kind of crowd noise you hear on a ship's deck or at an outdoor bar. His voice was warm and relaxed in a way that it almost never was on a Tuesday afternoon. "Hey," he said, "how are you feeling?" "Where are you?" I asked. "What happened to our savings?" A brief pause. "We're celebrating Mom and Dad. You know how much this trip meant to them." "That was our down payment," I said. "Kara, relax, we can save again, this was important." Before I could say another word, he told me the ship's Wi-Fi was spotty and he would call me later. The call ended. I sat in that hospital bed with the phone in both hands and tried to understand what had just happened. I opened the banking app and went through every transaction line by line. The first withdrawal had processed at 7:18 in the morning, approximately 40 minutes after the paramedics had brought me through the hospital doors. The second cleared just before noon. I had been in surgery from 9 a.m. onward. I hadn't been awake for any of it. I opened Instagram next. My sister-in-law had posted 4 hours ago. In the photo, she stood on the deck of a cruise ship wearing a wide-brimmed white hat, arm around my mother-in-law, both of them laughing with the ocean stretching out behind them. My brother-in-law had posted a video of my father-in-law cutting an anniversary cake at what looked like a private dining event. Another post showed the whole extended family gathered around a table covered in food. Lobster tails, shrimp towers, steaks, bottles of wine lined up in a row. Everyone was dressed up. Everyone was smiling. My husband was in 3 of the photos, sun-kissed and grinning. He had told me he would be right here. I stared at those photos until my eyes stopped tracking the images properly. A nurse came in to check my IV and noticed I wasn't responding the way I had been earlier. She asked if I was in pain. I told her my stomach hurt. That wasn't entirely a lie. After she left, I called my sister-in-law. She answered sounding exactly the way she looked in the photos. Effortlessly happy, slightly breathless, like someone who had just come off a dance floor. "Did my husband transfer our savings for this trip?" I asked. I didn't bother with a preamble. She paused just long enough to decide on her approach. "Kara, this trip has been planned for months. Mom and Dad's 35th anniversary only happens once. You knew how important this was to the whole family. I was in emergency surgery when that money left our account. And we are all so relieved you're okay," she said, her voice smoothing over the edges. "Honestly, you gave everyone such a scare, but there wasn't anything any of us could do from the ship. The deposits were non-refundable. It would have meant everyone losing thousands of dollars." "That money was for our house," I said. "You're both young. You'll save again." Her tone stayed pleasant but clipped. "Don't make this into something it isn't." She ended the call. I called my brother-in-law next. He laughed when he heard my voice, an actual unhesitating laugh. "Come on," he said. "You're already talking. That's a good sign. Are you aware that all of that money came out of my account while I was unconscious?" "Brett's name is on the account too," he said. "He didn't do anything wrong, technically. He emptied it, without telling me, while I was in surgery." Look, things moved fast. Nobody wanted to cancel the whole trip and disappoint Mom and Dad. He lowered his voice like he was offering something reasonable. Just get better. We can sort everything out when we're home. He hung up. I called 4 more relatives over the next hour. 2 didn't pick up. One told me she had been told by my husband that I was aware of the plan and had agreed to it before going in for surgery. The last one said, and I remember this clearly, "These things happen in families. You can't put a price on a memory." Not one person asked how my surgery had gone. Not one person asked what recovery looked like, or whether I was frightened. They mentioned excursion bookings, dinner reservations, whether the sea was rough. Every single conversation felt like walking into the wrong room. After the last call, I set my phone face down on the blanket and looked out the window at the hospital parking lot. I had been awake for maybe 4 hours. My abdomen was still in enough pain that I was pressing the call button for the nurse every time I tried to shift position. Somewhere in the Caribbean, my husband was deciding which dessert to order. The days that followed were the quietest I had ever known. I had 2 roommates at different points during my stay. Both had people coming in and out throughout the day. Grandchildren, partners, co-workers with flowers, a woman who brought an entire pot of soup in a thermal bag and set it on the visitor's tray, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My side of the room stayed empty except for the nurses, who started stopping by a little more often than they probably needed to. One of them sat with me for 20 minutes during her break, after noticing I had been reading the same page of a magazine for nearly an hour. I didn't tell her why. She seemed to understand anyway. My phone kept lighting up. My husband sent 2 messages over the first 3 days. The first was to ask whether I had renewed the parking pass for our building, because he would need it when he got back. The second was a photo of him and his parents at a formal captain's dinner. Everyone dressed up, holding champagne flutes. He had written, "Wish you could have been here." Mom cried happy tears. My sister-in-law posted stories every few hours, snorkeling in clear water, a fruit tower at the buffet, a video of my father-in-law dancing that got 200 likes and a string of heart emojis. My brother-in-law posted a reel with a pop song underneath it. Every post loaded automatically, while I lay in my hospital bed, breathing carefully, because deep breaths still pulled at the incision. On the 4th day, my sister drove the 2 hours from Guelph to sit with me for the afternoon. She brought a thermos of tea, a blanket from home because she knew I hated hospital blankets, and a container of the butter chicken she knew I liked. She sat in the chair beside my bed and didn't say much for a while. She just let me talk. At one point she reached over and held my hand and said quietly, "You know this isn't okay, you know that, right?" I did know, I just hadn't been able to say it out loud until then. She was still there when my husband walked through the door on day 5. He came in wearing a linen shirt I had never seen before, the kind sold in a duty-free shop at a port, and carrying a paper bag from the hospital gift shop downstairs. He looked well rested. His face was faintly sun-flushed in the way that only happens when you have spent several days outdoors without a single worry. He stopped briefly when he saw my sister, and gave her a smile that didn't quite land. "Good, you've got company," he said. He leaned down and kissed my forehead in a way that felt automatic. "How are you doing?" I looked at him and said nothing. He set the bag on the table. Inside was a snow globe with a tiny cruise ship inside it, the name of the ship printed in gold letters on the base, the kind of thing sold in a rack beside the checkout, maybe $8 or $9. "Thought you'd like something to remember the trip," he said. My sister made a quiet sound. I picked up the snow globe, turned it over once, set it back down. "You used our down payment," I said, "to buy me a snow globe." He laughed. Genuinely, like I had said something almost funny. "Kara, the snow globe didn't come out of savings. It came out of the gift shop." He sat down as though settling in. "Come on, don't be like this." "Like what?" "Dramatic." He pulled out his phone. "You have to see the photos. The ship was incredible. They had a steakhouse with reservations and everything." He started scrolling. "Dad was so happy. It was completely worth it. You would have loved it." My sister stood up. She touched my hand briefly, said she was going to get a coffee, and left in a way that made it clear she was giving me space rather than actually wanting coffee. I sat there and watched my husband scroll through 400 photos and 24 videos, narrating each one like I was a colleague he had run into at a Tim Hortons, rather than someone who had spent 5 days in a hospital bed, wondering if he was coming. He told me about a night the ship hit rough water, and his mother had gotten seasick. He told me the Wi-Fi had cost $30 a day, and he hadn't thought it was worth it. He described every meal in detail, the sauces, the presentation, whether the portions were good. He did not at any point ask how I was feeling. When he finally put his phone away, he reached over and patted my hand. "You'll be back on your feet in no time," he said. "And hey, we'll plan our own trip next year. Make it up to you." "With what money?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment. "We'll figure it out." He glanced toward the door. "Is there somewhere I can get food around here? I haven't eaten since the airport." I told him the cafeteria was on the second floor, and he got up and left. Something shifted while he was gone. I'm not sure I can explain it even now. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was more like a door closing very quietly. I looked at the snow globe on the table and understood something with a calm I hadn't expected. I was not going to let this go. I asked for my laptop the following morning and told the nurse I needed to handle some banking. She adjusted my tray without asking any questions. I downloaded 3 months of statements from every account I had access to. I printed what I could from the floor's shared printer, organized each page by date, and highlighted both withdrawals in yellow. I pulled my hospital admission records, requested a copy of my surgical timeline, and noted the exact sequence: taken into the OR at 9:04 in the morning, anesthesia administered at 9:17, not fully conscious again until 2:50 in the afternoon. The first transfer had cleared at 7:18 a.m., the second at 11:46. Then I went through my phone. I saved every text message. I took screenshots of every social media post with its timestamp. I kept the voicemail my husband had left before the trip reminding me to pay the property tax installment, because he would be out of town for a while. That was the only advance notice he had given me about any of it. When my husband visited the following morning, I was different. I asked how he had slept. I listened while he talked about being tired from the flight and needing to catch up on work emails. I offered him the extra pudding cup from my tray. He seemed relieved in a way that was almost embarrassing. Before he left, he said he thought I was finally coming around. I smiled and said I was feeling much better. He did not notice that my laptop closed the moment he walked in. 3 days after discharge, I sat across from a fraud specialist at my branch of RBC in East Toronto with my printed bank records, my hospital records, and my phone laid out on her desk. She read through everything carefully before speaking. "Were you able to authorize these transfers at any point?" she asked. "I was under general anesthesia," I said. "The surgical records confirmed the exact timing." She compared the timestamps for several seconds without speaking. Then she made a note and said she was referring my case to the Fraud and Financial Crimes Unit. The following week, I met with a family law solicitor. I spread my documents across her conference table, the same way I had organized them in my hospital room. "You've been very thorough," she said. "I had a lot of time in bed," I said. "Don't confront him yet. Don't change anything in the household. Keep gathering." 2 weeks after I came home, the investigators asked whether we had any home security footage. We had a Ring camera at the front door and a second one mounted near the side entrance by the garage. They asked for the recordings from the morning I was taken to the hospital. When the footage loaded, the investigator asked me to watch a specific window of time. The video showed the ambulance in the driveway. It showed 2 paramedics bringing me out on a stretcher. It showed my husband walking out behind me, talking on his phone, watching the ambulance pull away. That part I already knew. What came next I had not anticipated. 14 minutes after the ambulance left, my husband walked back inside alone. He went directly to my home office. The hallway camera caught a partial view of him sitting at my desk, opening my laptop, and staying there for approximately 9 minutes. Then he walked back to the front of the house and left in his car. The investigator paused the recording. "That timing," she said, "is before the first transfer cleared." My husband had known my banking password for years. I had shared it during a work trip when I needed him to pay a bill remotely. I had never changed it. I had never thought I needed to. "From this point forward," the investigator said, "continue as normal. Don't let him know we're looking at this." I nodded and drove home. I made dinner that evening. I asked my husband about his day. I watched 2 hours of television beside him. He fell asleep on the couch halfway through something he had chosen. I sat there in the quiet of our living room, understanding exactly the kind of man I had married. The call came on a Thursday morning. "We're ready to move forward," the investigator said. "If you'd like to proceed." "Yes," I said, "please proceed." By that afternoon, the bank had frozen the joint account and flagged both transactions for formal review. A separate complaint had been filed with the Financial Crimes Unit at the Toronto Police Service. My solicitor had begun preparing the divorce application. My husband's card was declined at the grocery store. He called me 15 minutes later. "Something's wrong with the account," he said. "The bank is reviewing some transactions," I told him. A pause. "What kind of review?" "The kind that happens when money is transferred without authorization." He was home in 20 minutes. He came in loud and moving quickly, the way he always did when he was caught off guard, momentous instead of thinking. "You didn't," he said. "I did," I said. "Kara, you are going to call them right now and fix this. My parents are trying to use their travel card and—" "Your parents are welcome to call the bank themselves." He stood in the kitchen doorway staring at me. I think it was the first time he had genuinely looked at me since before the trip. I don't think he had any idea what he was seeing. His phone rang. His sister. "Someone called the house asking about the cruise payment," she said. Her voice had lost every trace of the smoothness from our hospital call. "Brett, what's going on?" "They're asking who authorized the booking." "Just stay calm," he said. "It's probably a mix-up." "It is not a mix-up," she said. "They asked for documentation. They mentioned fraud." "Then don't say anything until I call you back." He moved into the living room and lowered his voice. "But the house is not large. I handled it. Just say you didn't know where the payment originated." "You told me she agreed to it," his sister said. "You told all of us she had signed off before the surgery." "She would have agreed if I had asked her." "That is not the same thing, Brett." My brother-in-law's voice joined the call. "I just got a message from the cruise line's billing department. They're asking about the primary cardholder." "I'll handle it," my husband said. "You said there was no issue. You specifically said she would not make this into a big deal. You said she'd be over it by the time we landed." "I didn't say." "You did. We have the group chat. Everyone in this family has that conversation saved." I listened from the kitchen while my husband tried to manage the story. His sister said she was not going to take responsibility for something she had been told was already settled. My brother-in-law said he had only agreed to go because my husband had assured him the funds were properly accounted for. A cousin joined the call and said the same thing. Excuses flew in every direction, and not one of them pointed anywhere except back toward my husband. He walked back into the kitchen eventually. He stood there for a moment and then said, very quietly, "You're really doing this?" "I really am," I said. That evening my solicitor forwarded a summary of what the investigators had recovered from the family group chat. The messages began the morning of my surgery. My husband had written at 6:52 a.m. "She's going in at 9. The transfers are ready. Meet at the port by 1. His sister had replied, "You sure she's okay with this?" My husband, "She'll be out all day anyway. I'll explain when we're back." My brother-in-law, "As long as you're sure. Let's go see everyone at the port." Seeing it written out in a formal investigator's summary was different from imagining it. It was concrete and precise and completely deliberate. They had not misread the situation. They had read it exactly right and moved forward anyway. The bank confirmed the transfers had been made without my consent and reversed what they were able to recover, approximately $17,400. The remainder was tied up in the cruise company's refund timeline and partial booking credits. My solicitor filed for divorce on grounds of financial misconduct within the marriage. The preliminary hearing moved quickly. The judge reviewed the timeline without visible expression. When she spoke, she noted that the case presented a clear pattern of one spouse accessing shared funds without knowledge or consent during a period when the other spouse was demonstrably unable to have provided that consent. She used the phrase, "a deliberate window of opportunity." My husband's counsel argued joint account access. The judge acknowledged it and continued. I walked out of the courthouse carrying the same folder I had first assembled in my hospital room. My sister was waiting on the steps, with 2 coffees from Tim Hortons. She handed me one without saying anything, and we stood together in the October cold, looking out at the street. "What now?" she asked. "I signed the lease on a place in Leslieville last week," I said. "I move in on Friday." She nodded. We drank our coffee. In the weeks that followed, several family members were contacted by the bank as part of the broader fraud review and required to provide documentation of their involvement in the cruise booking. My sister-in-law called me once, shortly after receiving her letter, and asked whether there was anything we could do to resolve things privately. I told her to speak with the investigator. I don't know what she said. I had already stopped tracking what any of them were doing. The apartment in Leslieville had good light and a balcony facing east. I bought a plant and put it in the window. I set up my kitchen exactly the way I wanted it. I slept 8 hours the first night without the monitor sound or the IV or the particular quiet of a hospital room where everyone is just barely getting by. Some mornings I still think about sitting in that hospital bed, reading the banking alert, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, trying to understand how the man who had held my hand before surgery could have driven back to our house and opened my laptop before the ambulance even reached the hospital. At the time it felt like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I see it differently now. If my husband had made different choices that morning, if he had waited or asked or even hesitated, I might have spent years more trusting people who had never once earned that trust. The surgery was supposed to give me back my health. What happened while I was under gave me something harder to name, and far more valuable. The absolute clarity of knowing exactly who the people around me were willing to be when they believed no one was watching. The snow globe is still in a box somewhere. I haven't decided what to do with it, but I don't need to smash it either. Some things are worth keeping precisely because they mark the exact moment you stopped making excuses for people who never once made any for themselves.